It was a victory that cost an empire. Long before the cry for American independence, a forgotten war raged across the forests and rivers of North America, a conflict that would secretly forge a new nation, even as it bankrupted the old. This is the story of the war before the revolution, the one that truly set the stage. Welcome to Old Around the World, where we travel back in time to bring historical events back to life. Before the Declaration of Independence, before the first shots were fired at Lexington and Concord, before the iconic figures of the American Revolution even dreamed of a separate nation, there was another war. A brutal, sprawling conflict fought not just in the gilded courts of Europe, but deep within the unforgiving wilderness of North America. It was a war that would unknowingly forge the identity of a new people, redraw the map of a continent, and cripple the very empire that emerged victorious. This is the story of the French and Indian War, the North American chapter of a global struggle known as the 7 Years' War. It was a clash of empires, a battle for resources, and a crucible for future leaders. Over the next 10 parts, we will explore how this often overlooked war laid the critical groundwork for American independence, fundamentally altering the relationship between Great Britain and its colonies, largely because its staggering costs sowed the seeds of resentment and rebellion. From the dense forests of the Ohio Valley to the gates of Quebec, we'll uncover the causes, the key players, the dramatic turning points, and the profound, often unintended, consequences of a war that truly made America, even as it began to bankrupt Britain. To understand the French and Indian War, we must first appreciate the world stage upon which it was set. The mid-18th century was an age of intense imperial rivalry, dominated by two European superpowers, Great Britain and France. Driven by the economic theory of mercantilism, these empires clashed repeatedly across the globe, vying for control of trade routes, resources, and vast colonial territories. In North America, this rivalry played out across a vast and largely uncharted wilderness. France laid claim to an immense territory known as New France, a sprawling arc extending from eastern Canada, through the Great Lakes region, and down the Mississippi River Valley to Louisiana. French presence, however, was thinly spread, characterized by a network of forts, trading posts, and alliances forged through commerce with Native American nations. British North America, by contrast, consisted of 13 colonies hugging the Atlantic coast, with a significantly larger and rapidly growing settler population, increasingly eager to push westward. Caught between these encroaching European giants were the numerous and diverse Native American nations. They were not a monolithic block, but a complex tapestry of distinct cultures, each with their own interests and alliances. Tribes like the powerful Iroquois Confederacy, the Huron, the Algonquin, the Shawnee, and many others, found themselves in a precarious position, often playing the French and British against each other to maintain their autonomy and control the lucrative fur trade. This complex middle ground was a space of constant negotiation and, increasingly, conflict. The French and Indian War was not the first time Britain and France had clashed in North America. Earlier conflicts, like King William's War, Queen Anne's War, and King George's War, were essentially North American theaters of larger European wars, simmering existing tensions and demonstrating the increasing strategic importance of the continent. Each uneasy peace seemed merely a prelude to the next, more intense confrontation. As the 1750s dawned, the focal point of this escalating tension became the Ohio River Valley. This region, rich in resources and a critical transportation corridor, was claimed by both empires. France began constructing a chain of forts to solidify its claim and protect its fur trading interests. Meanwhile, British colonists, particularly ambitious Virginians and land speculation groups like the Ohio Company, saw the Ohio Valley as their natural sphere of expansion. But the Ohio Valley was ancestral land for numerous Native American nations, including the Delaware, Shawnee, and Miami, who found themselves squeezed between the competing powers. The valley was a tinderbox, and it would take only a spark to ignite a conflagration. The spark came from a young Virginia militia officer named George Washington. In late 1753, Virginia's Governor Robert Dinwiddie dispatched the 21-year-old Washington to deliver an ultimatum to the French at Fort Le Boeuf, demanding their withdrawal from territory claimed by Britain. The French politely but firmly refused. The following spring, in May 1754, Washington returned to the Ohio Valley with a small force. Near Great Meadows, Washington's native allies, led by the Seneca chief Tenahurrison, located a small French diplomatic party under Ensign Jumonville. In a controversial skirmish at Jumonville Glen, Washington's forces and Tenahurrison's warriors ambushed the French, and Jumonville was killed. This relatively minor incident effectively marked the first shots of the French and Indian War. Anticipating French retaliation, Washington hastily constructed Fort Necessity. On July 3, 1754, a superior French and native force surrounded the fort, and Washington was forced to surrender, controversially admitting in the French written terms to the assassination of Jumonville. Even as these events unfolded, British officials called for a meeting of colonial representatives in Albany, New York, in June 1754. The Albany Congress aimed to repair relations with the Iroquois Confederacy and discuss common defense. It was here that Benjamin Franklin proposed his Albany Plan of Union, an ambitious call for a unified colonial government. While his iconic "Join or Die" cartoons symbolized the need for unity, the plan was ultimately rejected by both the colonial assemblies and the British Crown, though it foreshadowed future efforts at intercolonial cooperation. The skirmishes in the Ohio Valley finally jolted the British government into more decisive action. In early 1755, Major General Edward Braddock arrived in Virginia with 2 regiments of British regulars, his mission to eject the French from Fort Duquesne. Braddock, confident in his disciplined redcoats, planned a traditional European-style campaign. The expedition was a logistical nightmare as the army moved slowly, cutting Braddock's road through the wilderness. George Washington served as a volunteer aide, his counsel on frontier tactics often dismissed. On July 9, 1755, just miles from Fort Duquesne, Braddock's advance force was devastatingly ambushed by a smaller but highly mobile force of French, Canadian militia, and Native American warriors. The Redcoats, trained for open-field battles, were thrown into disarray. General Braddock was mortally wounded. Amidst the carnage, Washington displayed remarkable courage, organizing a retreat. Braddock's defeat sent shockwaves through the colonies, emboldened the French and their allies, and starkly illustrated the ineffectiveness of traditional European tactics in the North American wilderness. Over the next 2 years, the war continued to go badly for the British. The French captured Fort Oswego and, in August 1757, Fort William Henry. After the British surrender at Fort William Henry, Montcalm's native allies, infuriated by lenient terms, attacked the departing British column. The subsequent massacre, though its scale was often exaggerated, became a rallying cry for the colonists. As news of defeats reached London, public outcry mounted. In 1757, William Pitt the Elder rose to prominence, taking control of Britain's global war strategy. Pitt recognized North America as a decisive theater and committed unprecedented resources, men, money, and naval power to achieve total victory there. Crucially, Pitt treated the American colonies as partners, promising financial reimbursement for their military expenditures, which inspired colonial assemblies to raise larger forces. He also promoted younger, more capable British officers. The results became dramatically apparent by 1758. In July, a British expedition captured the formidable French fortress of Louisbourg, guardian of the Gulf of St. Lawrence. In August, Fort Frontenac on Lake Ontario fell, severing French supply lines to the west. In November, the French abandoned and burned Fort Duquesne. The British took control of the forks of the Ohio and began constructing Fort Pitt. Pitt's strategy culminated in 1759, Britain's Annus Mirabilis, the Year of Wonders. In July, a British and Iroquois force captured Fort Niagara, further isolating French garrisons. On the Lake Champlain corridor, General Jeffrey Amherst took Fort Ticonderoga after the French retreated. But the ultimate prize was Quebec, the heart of New France. In the summer of 1759, a massive British expedition commanded by Major General James Wolfe besieged the city, defended by the Marquis de Montcalm. After weeks of probing, Wolfe executed a daring pre-dawn landing on September 13th, scaling the cliffs to assemble his army on the Plains of Abraham. Montcalm, shocked, marched out to meet them. The ensuing battle was brief but decisive. British volleys shattered the French lines. Both Wolfe and Montcalm fell mortally wounded. Quebec City surrendered a few days later. The capture of Quebec, combined with other victories, effectively sealed the fate of New France. Despite the loss of Quebec, the French and Canada fought on briefly. In the spring of 1760, the Chevalier de Lévis defeated the British outside Quebec but was forced to lift his siege with the arrival of the British fleet. The fate of New France was decided at Montreal. Throughout the summer of 1760, 3 British armies converged on the city. Outnumbered and cut off, French Governor Vaudreuil surrendered Montreal and all of New France on September 8, 1760. Major fighting in North America was over, though the broader 7 Years' War continued globally for another 3 years. Finally, in 1763, the warring powers signed the Treaty of Paris. France ceded almost all of its North American empire to Great Britain, Canada, and all French territory east of the Mississippi River. Spain ceded Florida to Britain but received Louisiana west of the Mississippi from France. French colonial power in mainland North America was extinguished. Great Britain now stood as the undisputed colonial master of the eastern half of the continent. The end of the French and Indian War left an indelible mark on the British-American colonists. Tens of thousands had served, fostering a nascent sense of common American identity and providing crucial military experience for future leaders like George Washington. Perhaps most significantly, the removal of the French threat lessened colonial dependence on British military protection and fueled a desire for westward expansion. However, this immediately collided with the interests of Native American nations. In 1763, inspired by the Ottawa Chief Pontiac, a powerful confederation of tribes rose up in Pontiac's rebellion, attacking British forts and devastating frontier settlements. In response, the British government issued the Royal Proclamation of 1763, forbidding colonial settlement west of the Appalachian Mountains to prevent further conflict. While intended to stabilize the frontier, the proclamation angered many colonists who saw it as a betrayal and an infringement on their right to expand, becoming a significant early point of contention. While the colonies grappled with new frontier realities, Great Britain faced a crisis, the staggering financial cost of its victory. The 7 Years' War had nearly doubled Britain's national debt. The British government desperately needed new revenue to service this debt and pay for the administration and defense of its expanded empire, including 10,000 troops in North America. From London's perspective, it seemed fair that the American colonies, who had benefited from the war, should contribute. The era of salutary neglect ended. Beginning in 1764, Parliament passed acts aimed at raising revenue from the colonies. The Sugar Act aimed to curb smuggling. The highly contentious Stamp Act of 1765 imposed a direct tax on printed materials. The Quartering Act required colonies to house British troops. Later, the Townshend Acts imposed duties on imported goods. These measures ignited a firestorm of protest. Colonists argued that, as British subjects, they could only be taxed by their own elected representatives. No taxation without representation became a powerful rallying cry. Organizations like the Sons of Liberty emerged, and the Stamp Act Congress formally protested. The continued presence of a British standing army was also viewed with deep suspicion, seen by many not as protectors but as a potential threat to their liberties. The French and Indian War, a conflict that had secured Great Britain's dominance, had simultaneously sown the seeds of its own empire's unraveling. The victory was monumental, but its aftermath created a fundamentally altered landscape for both the American colonies and the mother country. Britain, burdened by war debt, saw its colonies as a legitimate source of revenue. The new taxes and regulations were seen in London as reasonable, but to the colonists, they felt like a profound betrayal and an overreach of parliamentary power. The argument was no longer just about money, it was about liberty and representation. The war itself had inadvertently prepared the colonies for the struggle to come, giving men military experience and forcing considerations of intercolonial cooperation. With the French threat removed, the colonies felt less reliant on Britain. British attempts to manage its new territories, like the Proclamation of 1763, fueled resentment. Each new British measure was met with escalating resistance. Events like the Boston Massacre and the Boston Tea Party were flashpoints in a steadily worsening crisis rooted in the aftermath of the French and Indian War. Thus, the great irony is laid bare. Great Britain fought and won a global conflict, yet, in doing so, created the very conditions that would lead to the loss of its most prized American colonies. The immense financial burden led directly to policies of taxation and control that colonists viewed as tyrannical. The French and Indian War was more than just a prelude to the American Revolution. It was its essential catalyst. It was, indeed, the war that made America, by forcing colonists to define who they were and what they stood for, in the war that bankrupted Britain, not just financially, but ultimately in terms of the loyalty of its American subjects. The quest for continental dominance had paved the road to independence. And so, our journey through the tumultuous years of the French and Indian War draws to a close. We've traversed vast forests, stood on bloody battlefields, witnessed the clash of empires, and explored the intricate web of alliances and betrayals that characterize this pivotal, yet often overshadowed, conflict. We've seen how the struggle for a continent unknowingly laid the foundations for a new nation, even as it strained an old empire to its breaking point. Thank you, truly, for accompanying us on this exploration, for lending your time and attention to a story that deserves to be remembered and understood in all its complexity. But the end of this documentary is not intended to be the end of your engagement with this history. Rather, we hope it serves as a starting point, a spark to ignite further curiosity, deeper reflection, and continued conversation. The echoes of the French and Indian War resonate far beyond its immediate aftermath. They are woven into the very fabric of North American identity, its political landscapes, and the enduring questions of power, justice, and belonging. In the moments that follow, we want to delve a little deeper into some of these echoes, to reflect further on the profound transformations this war unleashed, and to invite you, our valued viewers, to become an active part of this ongoing historical inquiry. This is not just about passively receiving information, it's about actively engaging with it, questioning it, and connecting it to the world we inhabit today. Before we embark on these extended reflections, if the narrative of the French and Indian War that we've shared has resonated with you, if it has offered new perspectives or deepened your understanding, please consider taking a moment right now to give this documentary a like. It's a simple gesture, but it significantly helps others discover this crucial chapter of history. And if you're new to your channel name, or if you haven't yet joined our community of history enthusiasts, we warmly invite you to subscribe. By doing so, you ensure you won't miss out as we continue to unearth and share more pivotal stories from our collective past. The central thesis of our documentary has been that the French and Indian War made America, while it bankrupted Britain. These are bold claims, and they warrant a more expansive contemplation than the main narrative perhaps allowed. Let's first consider the forging of an American identity. It's easy to point to figures like George Washington, whose early military career, though initially marked by humbling defeat at Fort Necessity, provided invaluable experience and a growing reputation that would later propel him to lead the Continental Army. His resilience at Braddock's defeat, his understanding of frontier warfare, and his ability to command respect among colonial troops were all honed during these formative years. But the nascent American identity was not solely forged in the crucible of high command. Tens of thousands of ordinary colonists, farmers, artisans, laborers, served in provincial militias or as auxiliaries to the British regulars. They marched incredible distances, endured harsh conditions, faced terrifying combat, and witnessed firsthand the capabilities and, at times, the arrogance of the British military machine. Men from Massachusetts found themselves campaigning alongside Virginians. Pennsylvanians fought beside New Yorkers. These shared experiences, however fraught with intercolonial rivalries and class distinctions, began to chip away at purely local loyalties. They fostered a sense of common struggle, a shared Americanness that transcended individual colonial boundaries, even if it was initially defined more by what they were not French. Not purely British subjects in the same mold as those in the mother country, than by a fully articulated positive identity. The colonists saw their own contributions, their own sacrifices, and began to develop a sense of their own distinct capabilities and worth within the larger empire. This growing self-awareness, this quiet confidence, was a crucial psychological prerequisite for any future thoughts of independence. The war also exposed them to the wider world, to the complexities of imperial politics, and to the vastness of the continent they inhabited. Simultaneously, let's unpack the bankruptcy of Britain. The financial figures are stark. The national debt nearly doubled, imposing a crushing burden that would necessitate new and controversial forms of revenue generation. This economic strain is undeniable and was a direct catalyst for the taxation policies that so inflamed colonial sentiment. But Britain's bankruptcy extended beyond its treasury ledgers. There was a bankruptcy of its old colonial policy. The era of salutary neglect, which had allowed the colonies a significant degree of autonomy, was deemed unsustainable by a government desperate for control and revenue. This shift was, in itself, a shock to a colonial system accustomed to a looser rein. Furthermore, there was perhaps a bankruptcy of understanding, a failure on the part of many in London to truly comprehend the evolving mindset of the American colonists. The assumption that colonists would readily accept parliamentary taxation without direct representation, or that they would willingly shoulder a significant portion of the imperial burden without a greater say in their own governance, proved to be a profound miscalculation. The very success in expelling the French removed a key element of colonial dependence on British military might, altering the power dynamic in ways British policymakers seemed slow to appreciate. The colonists, having contributed significantly to the victory, felt entitled to the spoils, particularly access to Western lands, and were deeply resentful of measures like the Proclamation of 1763, which seemed to deny them their hard-won gains. The debates within Britain itself were also telling. Figures like William Pitt, who had championed the war effort, often had a different vision of empire than the more fiscally conservative ministers who followed. There were arguments about the value of the newly acquired territories versus the cost of maintaining them, and differing opinions on how best to govern such a vast and diverse American domain. The bankruptcy, then, was not just financial. It was a crisis of imperial vision, a failure to adapt its relationship with increasingly mature and self-aware colonies in the wake of a transformative war. The old model was broken, and Britain struggled, ultimately unsuccessfully, to impose a new one that its American subjects would accept. The intricate interplay of these factors, the hardening of a distinct colonial identity through shared struggle, and the multifaceted crisis facing the British Empire in the wake of its costly victory, truly set the stage for the revolutionary drama to come. The French and Indian War didn't just precede the American Revolution, it actively shaped the actors, the grievances, and the very landscape upon which that later conflict would be fought. These transformations are profound, with layers of complexity that historians continue to debate. What specific moment, event, or factor from the French and Indian War do you believe was most critical in shaping this emerging American identity? Was it the shared military experience, the friction with British regulars, or the subsequent disillusionment with British policy? And from Britain's perspective, do you think there was an alternative path they could have taken in the post-war period to maintain colonial loyalty, or was the divergence already too great? We invite you to share your detailed analysis, your interpretations, and your arguments in the comments section below. Let's explore these pivotal questions together. While our documentary has focused on the clash between European empires and the nascent identity of the American colonies, it is profoundly important to acknowledge and further reflect upon the immense, often tragic, impact of the French and Indian War on the Native American nations who had inhabited these lands for millennia. The very name French and Indian War, common in American historiography, can itself be problematic, as it risks homogenizing the diverse indigenous peoples and often positions them merely as allies to one European power or another, rather than as independent actors with their own sovereign interests, complex diplomatic strategies, and profound stakes in the conflict's outcome. The middle ground, that intricate space of coexistence, trade, and shifting alliances that characterized native European relations in many regions before the war, was fundamentally shattered by the conflict. For generations, tribes like the Iroquois, Delaware, Shawnee, Cherokee, Creek, Ottawa, Huron, and countless others had navigated the presence of French and British traders, missionaries, and settlers, often skillfully playing one empire against the other to preserve their autonomy, secure favorable trade terms, and protect their territories. The war forced many of these nations to choose sides in a conflict that was not of their making, but whose outcome would irrevocably alter their world. Alliances were rarely simple or permanent. The Iroquois Confederacy, for example, officially maintained a policy of neutrality for part of the war, though various factions within it leaned towards or actively supported either the British or the French at different times, reflecting internal political dynamics and strategic calculations. Many Algonquian-speaking tribes of the Great Lakes region and the Ohio Valley found common cause with the French, who were generally perceived as less of a threat to their lands than the relentlessly expansionist British colonists. French traders often integrated more deeply into native communities, and French colonial ambitions were initially less focused on large-scale agricultural settlement than those of the British. However, to cast Native American involvement solely through the lens of European alliances is to miss their agency. Warriors fought to defend their homes, their families, and their ways of life. Leaders engaged in sophisticated diplomacy, seeking to protect their people's interests in a rapidly changing landscape. The outcome of the war, a decisive British victory in the expulsion of France from mainland North America, was catastrophic for most native nations. Suddenly, the diplomatic leverage they had wielded by balancing two rival European powers vanished. They were left to face a triumphant British Empire, often allied with land-hungry colonists, with little room for maneuver. Pontiac's rebellion, which erupted in 1763, was a direct and powerful response to this new reality. It was a multi-tribal effort to resist British power, to drive settlers from their lands, and to restore a measure of native autonomy. Though ultimately unsuccessful in its broadest aims, the rebellion demonstrated the depth of native resistance and forced the British government to reconsider its policies, leading directly to the Proclamation of 1763. While the proclamation theoretically protected native lands west of the Appalachians, it was often poorly enforced and deeply resented by colonists, setting the stage for decades of future conflict as American settlers pushed relentlessly westward. The long-term consequences of the French and Indian War for Native Americans were devastating. Widespread loss of land, the erosion of political sovereignty, increased economic dependence, devastating exposure to European diseases, and the disruption of traditional social structures and ways of life. Their stories, their perspectives, and their resilience in the face of overwhelming odds are integral to understanding this period, and indeed, the entire sweep of North American history. The narrative of the French and Indian War, and American history more broadly, is vastly enriched when we actively seek out and center these indigenous voices. What more can we, as students of history, as creators, and as viewers, do to ensure these perspectives are not just acknowledged but are woven into the core of our understanding? Do you know of specific historical accounts, oral traditions, academic works, or contemporary Native scholars and artists who shed crucial light on this period from an indigenous viewpoint? We sincerely invite you to share these resources, these names, and these insights in the comments. Let us collectively work to build a more inclusive and comprehensive understanding of this pivotal era. And if you believe these complex and often overlooked narratives deserve a wider audience, please consider sharing this documentary and this discussion with others who may be interested in exploring the multifaceted legacy of the French and Indian War. Beyond the immediate impact on the peoples and territories involved, the French and Indian War offers timeless lessons in geopolitics, the nature of leadership, and the often unforeseen ripple effects of major historical events. It serves as a compelling case study in how regional disputes, fueled by imperial ambitions and economic competition, can escalate into global conflagrations, drawing in nations and peoples far removed from the initial flashpoint in the Ohio Valley. The interconnectedness of the 18th century world, where events in the American wilderness could influence treaty negotiations in Paris and military strategies in India, is a stark reminder of the complexities of international relations, then and now. The leadership displayed during the war, on all sides, provides rich material for analysis. William Pitt the Elder's strategic vision, his ability to mobilize resources, and his understanding of the importance of the North American theater were instrumental in turning the tide for Britain. Yet, his aggressive spending also contributed directly to the post-war financial crisis. Figures like Montcalm and Wolfe, the tragic hero commanders at Quebec, demonstrated immense personal bravery and tactical acumen, but also perhaps limitations in adapting to the unique challenges of wilderness warfare and managing diverse forces. George Washington's early career, marked by both brashness and resilience, shows the development of a leader through trial and error. And we must not forget the often unrecorded leadership within Native American communities, chiefs and diplomats like Pontiac, Tana Harrison, or Hendrik Flanagan, who navigated incredibly complex choices with the survival of their people at stake. What qualities defined effective leadership in this era? How did these leaders balance strategic goals with ethical considerations, or the demands of their superiors with the realities on the ground? Perhaps one of the most powerful overarching themes of the French and Indian War is that of unintended consequences. Great Britain achieved its primary war aim, the expulsion of France from North America and the establishment of its own imperial supremacy. Yet, this very victory, as we've explored, created the conditions that led directly to the American Revolution just over a decade later. The removal of the French threat diminished colonial dependence on Britain. The vast new territories acquired proved difficult and costly to govern, leading to policies like the Proclamation of 1763 that alienated colonists. And the enormous war debt necessitated taxation measures that ignited the cry of no taxation without representation. It's a classic example of how short-term success can sow the seeds of long-term challenges, how solutions to one set of problems can inadvertently create new and even greater ones. This pattern of unintended consequences is a recurring motif throughout history. Can you think of other major historical events where the victors ultimately faced unforeseen and negative repercussions stemming directly from their triumph? Are there parallels in more contemporary geopolitical situations where the pursuit of one objective has led to a cascade of unexpected outcomes? History rarely unfolds in a neat, linear fashion, and the French and Indian War is a potent reminder of the complex, often ironic, ways in which events can shape the future. We encourage you to reflect on these broader themes of leadership, global interconnectedness, and the profound impact of unintended consequences. Which leader from this era do you find most compelling or controversial, and what lessons can we draw from their successes and failures? Share your thoughts on these complex dynamics in the comments below. If you appreciate this kind of analytical approach to history, exploring not just what happened but why, and what we can learn from it, please ensure you are subscribed to Old Around the World and have activated the notification bell so you don't miss our future explorations into the fascinating and often surprising currents of the past. The French and Indian War, despite its immense significance, often occupies a somewhat shadowy space in popular historical consciousness, frequently overshadowed by the more dramatic and nation-defining narrative of the American Revolution that followed it. Yet, as we've endeavored to show, understanding the French and Indian War is absolutely essential to understanding the Revolution. It is the indispensable prequel, the critical first act in the drama of American independence. So why, then, does it sometimes feel like a forgotten war? And what does its study tell us about the historian's craft and the way we construct and consume historical narratives? Part of its relative obscurity may lie in its complexity. It wasn't a simple, two-sided conflict. It involved multiple European powers, dozens of distinct Native American nations, and 13 disparate British colonies, each with their own agendas and internal divisions. Its battles were fought across a vast and often brutal wilderness, far from the more familiar landscapes of revolutionary battlefields like Bunker Hill or Yorktown. Its leading figures, with the notable exception of a young George Washington, are perhaps less household names than the founding fathers of the later era. Moreover, historical narratives often gravitate towards clear beginnings and definitive endings. The American Revolution provides a powerful origin story for the United States. The French and Indian War, by contrast, ends with one empire triumphant and another vanquished, but its deeper consequences were slower to unfold, more subtle in their initial appearance, requiring a more nuanced understanding of cause and effect. This highlights a crucial aspect of the historian's craft, the importance of tracing causality, of understanding how events separated by years, or even decades, can be inextricably linked. The path from the Treaty of Paris in 1763 to the Stamp Act protests of 1765, and then to the Declaration of Independence in 1776, is a direct line of consequence that begins with the outcomes of the French and Indian War. The study of this war also forces us to grapple with the nature of historical sources and interpretations. Much of what we know comes from European colonial records, official reports, letters, diaries, which inevitably reflect the biases and perspectives of their authors. Reconstructing the experiences and viewpoints of Native American participants, whose traditions were often oral rather than written, requires careful and respectful engagement with different kinds of evidence, including archaeology, oral histories passed down through generations, and a critical reading of European accounts. Popular depictions, too, have shaped perceptions. James Fenimore Cooper's 19th-century novel, The Last of the Mohicans, for instance, while a thrilling adventure, also romanticized and sometimes distorted the historical realities of the siege of Fort William Henry and the nature of Native American involvement. Part of studying history critically involves discerning fact from fiction, understanding how narratives are constructed, and recognizing the enduring power of myth and memory. Therefore, bringing the French and Indian War out of the shadows is not just an academic exercise. It is vital for a fuller, more complete understanding of how the United States came to be. It challenges us to look beyond simplistic narratives, to appreciate the complexities of the past, and to recognize the long and often winding roads that lead to transformative historical change. It reminds us that nations are not born in a vacuum, but are forged in the crucible of preceding events, often in ways that contemporaries could not fully foresee. What other forgotten or underappreciated historical events do you believe deserve more attention in the popular understanding of the past, and why? Are there specific aspects of the French and Indian War that you feel are still not widely understood or are commonly misrepresented? We invite you to share your suggestions for future documentary topics or your insights into the challenges of historical interpretation in the comments section. Your input is invaluable as we strive to create content that is both engaging and historically sound. And if you agree that understanding the often complex roots of major historical events is crucial, please show your support by giving this video a like. While this documentary has aimed to provide a comprehensive overview of the French and Indian War and its profound consequences, it is, by necessity, just one interpretation, one telling of a vast and multifaceted story. The true joy of history lies in the ongoing journey of discovery, the pursuit of deeper understanding, and the engagement with diverse perspectives. We sincerely hope that our exploration has whetted your appetite to learn even more about this fascinating and pivotal period. Fortunately, for those eager to continue their journey, a wealth of resources exists. For foundational scholarly works, one might turn to classics like Francis Parkman's epic Montcalm and Wolfe, or more contemporary analyses such as Fred Anderson's Crucible of War. For a focus on the Native American experience, works like Colin Calloway's The Scratch of a Pen or David Dixon's Never Come to Peace Again offer crucial insights. Primary sources, like the published papers of Washington or Franklin, offer first-hand accounts. Always read critically. Many historical societies and university archives hold invaluable manuscript collections. For visual and experiential learning, visiting historical sites associated with the French and Indian War can be incredibly powerful. Places like Fort Ticonderoga, Fort Necessity National Battlefield, the site of Fort Duquesne in Pittsburgh, or the battlefields around Quebec City offer tangible connections to these events, often with excellent museums and interpretive programs. Numerous other documentaries, academic lectures available online, and well-curated museum websites can provide additional layers of information. Our own channel, your channel name, may explore related topics in the future or delve deeper into specific aspects of this war if there is sufficient interest from you, our audience. Our exploration here doesn't have to be the final word. What are your go-to resources for learning about the French and Indian War or the colonial period? Are there specific books, websites, podcasts, or museums that you have found particularly enlightening? Please share your recommendations in the comments below. By pooling our knowledge, we can create an invaluable resource for everyone in our community who wishes to learn more. As we reach the culmination of this extended reflection on the French and Indian War, we want to return to a theme that is central to our mission here at Old Around the World, the power of community in keeping history alive, vibrant, and accessible. In an age of fleeting attention spans, taking the time to delve into the complexities of the past is a conscious choice, one we deeply value in every single one of our viewers. Independent history creators on platforms like YouTube rely immensely on the active engagement of their audience. It's a dialogue, a shared exploration. When you watch a documentary like this, you become part of a community of learners, thinkers, and questioners. And your actions, however small they may seem, have a significant impact. Every like you give to this video does more than just signal your approval. It tells the YouTube algorithm that this content is valuable, that it resonates, and that it deserves to be shown to a wider audience, helping other curious minds discover this story. Every thoughtful comment you leave transforms this space into a dynamic forum for discussion. Your questions challenge us. Your insights offer new perspectives. Your corrections, offered respectfully, help us maintain accuracy. Your personal connections add a rich human dimension. This comment section is your space to engage, to debate, to share, and to learn from one another. When you share this video with friends, family, students, colleagues, or on your social media, you become an ambassador for historical literacy. You help extend the reach of these stories, introducing new people to the fascinating ways the past has shaped our present. And, of course, when you subscribe and take that extra step to ring the notification bell, you become a core member of our dedicated community. You signal your commitment to this journey of historical discovery and ensure you'll be among the first to know when we release new documentaries. Your subscription is a vote of confidence, an encouragement that fuels our passion. These actions, Liking, commenting, sharing, subscribing are the lifeblood of channels like ours. They directly support our ability to continue investing the considerable time, research, and resources required to script, visualize, and produce documentaries that we hope are not only informative but also engaging and thought-provoking. We are a small team, driven by a profound love for history and a desire to share that passion with you. History, at its heart, is a shared human story. It belongs to all of us. By discussing it, by questioning it, by learning from its triumphs and its tragedies, we not only understand the past better, but we also gain valuable perspectives on the present and the challenges that lie ahead. The community we are building here at Your Channel Name is one we cherish, a community of curious minds, respectful debaters, and fellow enthusiasts for the grand, unfolding narrative of human experience. So, as we conclude this deep dive into the French and Indian War, we want to express our profound gratitude. Thank you for your time, for your attention, for your intellectual curiosity, and for any way in which you choose to engage with this content and with our channel. We are incredibly grateful for your presence here and for your passion for understanding the events that have so powerfully shaped our world. We eagerly look forward to continuing this journey of historical discovery with you in our next video and in the many discussions yet to come. Thank you, once again, for watching. Bye, history lover.